Right, thanks for staying on tonight and still with us. We've got our politics editor here at Newzroom Afrika, Lukhanyo Calata, who's been watching that very closely. And we're also joined by Moepeng Talane, senior investigative journalist for Corruption Watch. Talk more on what the president said today. From what I'm hearing, Lukhanyo, is the president saying, well, some of the work is already being done. For example, one of the recommendations was to establish an anti-corruption commission, and he says, well, we already have an anti-corruption advisory council that will continue to do its work. One of the recommendations also was, for example, an establishment of what is called a standing appointment and oversight committee to oversee the appointment of board chairs and CEOs to these state-owned enterprises. And he basically says it's work in progress. Is there anything that you're picking up here in terms of action that is really out of the ordinary to what we've already been seeing?
I think the fact, for me, the only thing that's newsworthy that's come out of tonight's announcement by the president is indeed the fact that the investigating directorate is going to now become a permanent entity within the NPA, sorry. I think everything else, we might have to go and read the president's responses to the National Assembly. Because based on what he said today, I am none the wiser as to what exactly the government, the executive, his office as the president, how they're going to prevent state capture from ever happening. Because the president did not outline that today to us as a nation. I think he gave us very broad strokes, and he said a lot, but there was very little in what he actually said. There was no detail, none whatsoever.
Yeah. Moepeng, did you pick up anything from what the president said today that is something of substance in terms of policy that is going to change in his government that will begin to deal with the state capture we saw and the corruption that has been reported in the commission?
I can't agree with Mr. Calata more in the sense that I don't see how, from what the president has shared this evening, I don't see how we had to wait 6 months for that to happen. It could have been at the time when, the level of detail that he shared this evening could have been done at the time when he received the last installment of the Commission's report back in June. He really hasn't gone into detail as far as what law enforcement agencies, for instance, how they're going to be capacitated to deal with this extra load of work, how the broader recommendations like the anti-corruption agency and the professionalization of the procurement space, how, he didn't drill down into detail about how those things are going to work. Yeah. And the fact that he left out very key details about what's going to happen or not to members of his cabinet who are implicated, sitting cabinet who are implicated, is a bit worrying, really. So it's a more of a watch this space kind of address more than it is, detailed and reassuring for that matter in terms of
we are seeing what we are seeing is beginning to come out is that 77-page document that is the one that was been submitted to Parliament. We haven't, of course, gotten into the details of it and the meat of it, but just perusing it very quickly, one of the things that I'm reading here with you live as it comes in, while the state capture report has been submitted to the president for consideration, certain recommendations are directed to other institutions both within and outside the state. The greatest number of recommendations are directed to law enforcement agencies for investigations and possible prosecution. I suppose that, speaking to the question that you're asking about some of the prominent members of the ANC itself, where, according to the terms of reference of the commission then proposed that the investigators must investigate further with a view to prosecute. Almost the president here saying, well, there's nothing that I could possibly implement from the president's side. We'll have to allow those bodies to continue to do what they need to do.
I suppose what do we then say? What does he say about what needs to happen within the governing party itself? No, absolutely nothing. It's a bit worrying that we're not getting the details that we should be getting. Indeed, I would have thought that there would be something towards that speaks to how the recommendations that are within his powers to implement, how he would have applied his mind to those and taken us into his confidence.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that did not happen.
Well, these agencies fall within the executive arm, so to speak, and of course he has some degree of responsibility. Do you feel that he needed to say maybe a little bit more than just, well, I've handed them the report, they can go and look at my recommendations? There's also an expectation in the medium-term budget speech, which is happening this week, that there will be talk of actual financial support that is going to be given to these institutions to carry out this work.
For instance, the decision to make the investigating directorate permanent does, of course, then mean that it needs to be financially supported, right? Because now it means that they can capacitate the directorate. More people will have to come in. For instance, some of the staff, that came from the Zondo Commission will now be absorbed into the directorate. They need to be paid. And more people will, for it to be able to really implement the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, the independent investigating directorate has to be capacitated, so money will have to flow. But can I just make one point, Thabo, that the president made in his address? He said, to ensure that Parliament is sufficiently resourced to hold the executive to account, the National Treasury will engage with Parliament to determine the most appropriate way to give effect to the Commission's recommendations on the funding of Parliament. Now, Parliament holding the executive to account is not a monetary problem. It's got nothing to do with whether or not MPs have got enough money to do so. It's got everything to do with the will of the ANC that controls the majority of those portfolio committees within the National Assembly.
Yeah.
And if the ANC does not want to hold its members in the executive accountable, then Parliament, of course, those committees and Parliament ultimately is not going to hold them accountable. So giving Parliament more money is not going to mean that ANC MPs are going to hold ANC ministers accountable.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that.
There was a sense also in the report, if you read the recommendations of the Commission, that there needs to be almost another monitoring and oversight body that is going to look at Parliament that would need to be made up, I suppose, of people other than members of the African National Congress.
But that's an indictment on the African National Congress, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a clear indictment on the African National Congress that says that we can't trust you with the work that you are meant to do. So it's almost like we need to have oversight of those that are meant. It's like lawyers watching lawyers. It's like we can't have that. The African National Congress, and I think as detailed today, the State Capture Commission is, the report thereof, is as clear an endorsement of its failures as anything that we will ever see in this country. Because it has failed, and the State Capture Commission, the report, is that a handbook, that textbook that says this is how the ANC has failed. And we cannot expect them to hold themselves accountable. And
what does this say? I mean, their remarks coming out of their NEC that was held, and the task team that was looking at the recommendations gave them an answer. They're saying the ANC supports the establishment of the work of the Commission, but here's the kicker. We see it as an important, broader social effort to end all forms of state capture and corruption. Where does that put this particular document and how they view it?
Exactly. Thabo, it's actually not a funny or a laughing matter. It is incredibly sad that the African National Congress won't see this moment as an opportunity for it to turn itself around and start doing proper by us as South Africans. And, you know, yesterday we were at the briefing where former President Jacob Zuma launched a blistering attack on the Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, as well as current President Cyril Ramaphosa. But there was something interesting that he said, former President Zuma. He said, you know, SAA is gone. But literally 2 seats to his left was Dudumiyeni, the same person that he, as the president, had appointed to chair SAA. But then he comes yesterday and then he says SAA is gone. But without taking responsibility for what he did and his role in the demise of SAA. And that's what the ANC is going to do. It's not going to take and accept responsibility for the demise of our country.
Moepeng, I mean, of course, we are still going to get into the meat of what the president is saying in terms of the implementation plan. But already, I mean, judging from the summary of what we're hearing in his delivery today, what sense do you get about his view on the legal standing of those recommendations that are coming from the Commission?
Well, his assertion that, of course, he needs to use his prerogative in terms of the recommendations is correct. However, you would think that in his address before, or rather his appearance before the Commission, was it last year, he said that he described it as a huge opportunity for this reform that needs to happen in government, that needs to where systems have to be reformed to such an extent that there is no opportunity for state capture to happen again. So if he is coming back then to say, well, to give us a speech where he doesn't go into detail about how those changes are going to happen and how his office is going to be held accountable in making sure that those changes are indeed happening, it's a bit, disappointing. It leaves us wondering whether or not indeed we will be getting the updates, the regular updates that he spoke of, whether or not the NECAC, for instance, will receive the kind of support that it requires to implement its work as well. So, these are really important recommendations to implement, and it's a bit disappointing that the president has not taken the details that he should have in terms of how the reforms are going to happen.
We appreciate your time, Moepeng. Thank you very much for coming on. And Lukhanyo, thank you very much for coming on. You just want to add something to that?
Yeah, just one more thing, Thabo, before I go. The president, in his address, said the lack of compliance, transparency and accountability in the appointment of board members not only enabled the capture of these companies, but also contributed to a decline in their operational and financial performance. Yeah. Lack of compliance. Who appoints? So, and what are they not complying to? They're not complying. So the ANC, who's the majority in Parliament, appoints these board members. Yeah. So if there's a lack of compliance, there's a lack of compliance to the law. Just think about that.
It's more than just that. There's a whole lot more that comes with the lack of compliance to the law, and we'll continue to unpack that.